everyone. My name is Dr. Daphne Mohajer by Pesaran, and I'm the program manager of the Bachelor of Textiles Design at RMIT University here in Melbourne, Australia. I'm originally from Canada, which is why I have a non-Australian accent. Today, I'd like to talk to you about an ongoing research project where I'm exploring the potential for paper to be used to make clothing and objects. And I'll be discussing a new and developing area of interest in upcycled rag pulp and rag paper. As you can see, the title of my presentation is Rags Make Pulp, Pulp Makes Paper, Paper Makes Everything. And that may sound a little bit ambitious, but you'll see as I go through the presentation sort of why I titled my talk today as such. So first, I'll provide a little bit of historical context and background to paper and paper clothing. And then in the second half, I'll discuss rag paper specifically and show you some examples of how people are using rag and recycled pulp here in Australia to make beautiful new products. And I'll show you some of my initial tests as I progress. So this sort of area of interest here in rags and rag pulp is a new sort of venture for me, a new area of interest in research. So I'm still sort of at the beginning. On this slide is an image of a bag of rags, specifically t-shirt rags prepared for use in painting and to be sold in hardware stores. This is one way to think about the waste generated by the fashion industry, but I think that we would all agree that this is downcycling as it reduces the value rather than upcycling, which adds value. So the problem that we need to deal with here is that we make too many rags. Australians buy almost 15 kilograms of clothes or 56 new items every year, and most of it ends up in landfill, which makes Australia one of the highest consumers of textiles per capita in the world. So that's per person, 56 new items per person. There are 1.42 billion pieces of clothing, amounting to 373,000 tons of fabric arriving in Australia each year. So that's being imported into Australia. The annual cost to consumers in 2021 was $9.2 billion, meaning that Australians were paying on average only $6.50 for each item of clothing. So each of those 56 pieces of clothing that they were buying each cost $6.50. So this cheap price, creates a throwaway mindset, which I think this audience understands very well, and is the source of the problem that we have. At the other end of this fashion cycle, roughly 260,000 tons or 10 kilograms per person goes straight to the landfill. So it goes straight into the dump. On its way to the landfill, some items get recycled by garment recycling companies, or they end up in secondhand charity shops, or perhaps they get exported by the bale to other countries in the Pacific Islands or countries in Africa as well. And some garments get turned into rags, like I showed you in the beginning. So a staggering amount of fashion items are discarded as waste, and their materials may only exist in the form of a fashion item temporarily, as they'll eventually become rags or part of the mass of garbage in a landfill. And this brings us to rags and paper. This is an anonymous 18th century Irish saying about rags, and obviously the inspiration for the title of my talk. Rags make paper, paper makes money, money makes banks, banks make loans, loans make beggars, beggars make rags, and the cycle continues. So though this poem is, maybe somewhat satirical, rag pulp and rag paper have always been part of a circular production process. The first line, rags make paper, is a very definitive statement that shows how fundamental it was to use rags to make paper. All early paper in Western Europe was made from rags, made from linen, hemp, and cotton, old bed sheets, clothing, sailcloth, ropes, tarpaulins, sacks, all kinds of things. It wasn't until the 19th century that a German manufacturer developed a method for making paper out of wood pulp. This saying is the inscription on the first page of Dard Hunter's famous 1943 book pictured here, Papermaking, The History and Technique of an Ancient Craft. And this book is incredible, and it covers the history of the methods for making, but also the vast amount of applications and uses for paper throughout history. And there is anecdotal evidence and data in this book that states that at the end of the 1800s, United States mills were processing 350,000 tons of rag to produce paper each year. So if anyone's been taking notes, that exceeds the current volume of textile waste going to Australian landfills. So you see what I'm getting at here. On this slide is a poster that very nicely evidences the broad applicability of paper for consumer goods. This is a lithograph poster by Mihaly Biron, and it's an advertisement for a World War I era Austrian trade show. I don't speak German, so excuse my accent and bad translation, but I think it says Ersatzmittelausstellungsgruppe Papiergewerbe, and I think it translates to the paper fabric industry's exhibition of substitutes. During the wars, Germany and Austria had a difficult time importing materials and products and sought to make paper replacements for common things such as clothing. They had varying success, and there's some historical records of people describing how much they hated the paper cloths that were produced during the war and how they were scratchy and uncomfortable, and sort of a lot of bad memories being noted down. So yeah, they had varying success, but they even dispatched researchers to Japan to learn the techniques for making paper into a wide range of household goods that were of high quality, not uncomfortable, from doors and windows to toys, clothing, and even dishes. So what I'd like you to take away from this at this point is that paper can be used for many, many applications, including residential, industrial, daily life, and on the body. Paper can be printed, painted, spun, twisted, sprayed, molded, casted, knitted, woven, and formed into so many products. And paper can be made from textile waste. So I'm just going to do a little bit of definition work. I like to sort of define words sometimes just to sort of see where it goes. And so what is pulp and what is a sheet of paper? So a sheet of paper is a homogeneous sheet formed by irregularly intervening cellulose fibers. So here you can see on this image is the torn edge of a piece of Japanese washi paper. You can see that it is a non-woven mat of fibers, and they are long and fluffy. If you're at a desk, maybe you could rip a little piece of paper that you have, maybe it's a Post-it note or something in your notebook. You could rip a little bit that you have nearby, and you'll probably see that it's not so long and fluffy. What is pulp? Pulp is a suspension of cellulose fibers in water. And here you can see an image of some linen rag pulp that I made. It ended up looking a little bit like raw meat because I used some red linen mixed with white linen, but this was made from scraps of linen that were beaten to a pulp, turning them from fabric to fiber. And finally, pulping. Pulping is the process by which plant material, wood, grass, straw, or fabrics is reduced to a fibrous mass. It's achieved by rupturing bonds within plant structure. It can be accomplished mechanically, thermally, chemically, or some combinations of those treatments. This short video, if it will work, does it work? No. That is a video. I can show it to you later. This image on the right is a person adding rags to what's called a Reina beater, which is a machine that macerates the pieces of cloth to a pulp. So I've been working with this beater to start making rag pulp to use in my own practice and research. In my practice, I explore the historical and contemporary contexts for paper clothing using archival and historical research, also ethnographic research methods such as interview and participant observation, as well as experimental methods in the studio, testing material properties, affordances, and interactions. I do this as a researcher and a designer, and I run a very small collaborative practice called DNJ Paper with designer Jake Nakashima Edwards. These are two paper leather baseball caps that we produce using handmade Japanese paper. We cut, stitch, and then dye them, and then we finally wax them to give them sort of a water resistance, waterproofing finish, and durability, and it gives them almost like a leather-like texture and hand. This is another cap here that we painted and waxed, and a jacket that we produced from Japanese washi paper. So we're able to source our paper directly from artisans, and we have a very detailed amount of information about the conditions of production of each sheet. We've done some other projects about paper clothing, so if you're interested, please check out our Instagram and our website. But until now, my area of expertise has been Japanese paper. So if I can go here, will this video play? No. Perhaps if I do it like this, if I go out, I wonder if I can play it like this. There. Hopefully you can still see that. You just see my whole, yeah, okay. So yeah, until now, in this new pathway into rag paper, my area of expertise and interest has always been Japanese paper and Japanese paper clothing histories. So long before rag paper was developed and spread across the West and Western Europe, the techniques for making paper originated in China almost 2,000 years ago and traveled across Korea to Japan with Buddhist monks. And actually, some historians believe that the very first sheets of paper developed in China may have been made using disintegrated pieces of cloth, fishnets, and rags before moving on to bark, which is a much more efficient and yields a much more supple sheet of paper. Paper clothing was one of the many paper products that resulted from this movement from China through Korea and then into Japan. And for at least 1,200 years, monks and later everyday people and artisans across Japan have been making paper clothing and objects. So you can see in this video here, which I recorded in a town called Kurotani near Kyoto, how the maker shakes the frame as she makes each sheet. So she's pulling the fibers out of the pulp using a screen. And this is the same whether it's handmade paper or machine-made paper, Western paper or Eastern paper. It's the same idea. The fibers are in a vat of water, and then the maker or the machine brings them together and gets the fibers sort of tangled up together. And this paper specifically is made from the fibers of the paper mulberry tree that makes it sort of really strong and durable. So if you remember that fuzzy edge that I showed you before, this is what makes it useful for clothing and objects, that flexibility and those long fuzzy fibers. So now maybe I'll go back to a full screen here. So I'm really interested in exploring ways of, hang on, am I frozen? I think my computer's just frozen.
Yeah, it's frozen at the moment.
Okay, sorry.
Now it's okay.
Yeah, my computer's just frozen here. Give me 1 second. Maybe I'll just try refreshing. Are there any questions so far, maybe, that we could take while we're waiting for this to refresh? Here, let me try. I'll stop sharing for a second, and then I'll just let my computer kind of catch up.
Yeah, Elizabeth?
Are the garments wearable that you've made out there?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
What about with the weather?
Okay, that is the number one question that we get. Oh. What happens if it gets wet? Yeah. So just while I'm loading this up, so in the Japanese case, the historical pieces, the ethnographic sort of pieces, they are treated with a kind of starch that makes them durable and wet and water resistant. And we do the same thing. So we think of it sort of like almost like you would treat it with a lot of care. So it's not like a Gore-Tex. It's not something you'd wear camping. It's something that you would wear, without a tote bag sort of over your shoulder, and you would be a little bit more aware of it, I think, if you were wearing it. But the caps are waxed, so they're actually quite water resistant. And the pieces can be dry cleaned.
Wow. How much do you retail them for?
The caps?
Yeah.
We retail the caps for about $225.
Very cool.
Okay, thank you. Suddenly I'm making a sales pitch here. Yeah, but the idea is, for me, I think it's really important that they are theoretically interesting and conceptually interesting and exploring the possibility of a material, but it's really important that they're actually wearable, that they're actually anchored to real experience. And the same was with this rag paper as well, that it's, it's one thing for me to come to a conference and say, these are the possibilities of the material, and, paper can be everything, but I'd really like to see it in practice and, on the street and on the body as well. So, okay, it's loaded. I'm going to get back into it now. Thank you for the question to keep us busy while that was happening. Okay. Wait, it's gone again. Okay. Just skip through. Okay, here we are. Sorry about that. So I'm really interested in exploring ways that paper can be used for clothing. These are 3 Japanese examples, likely from the late 18th or mid 19th century. So there are 3 kinds of textiles made from handmade washi paper. The first is on the left, which is made of sheets of paper kneaded to add wrinkles to them, and then softened, and then finished with the starches, like I just mentioned to, I think it was Elizabeth. Then in the center is shifu, which are textiles woven out of paper yarns. So this example is a woven and indigo dyed outer coat, but a lot of workwear was actually made with this technique as well. So for this technique, sheets of paper are made in the same way as in the video that I just showed you, and then they're sliced and then opened up and then twisted into yarns and then used to weave. And they could be woven with cotton in the warp or silk in the weft or paper in both warp and weft. And then on the far right is net or knotted or macrame. And it's a traditional technique for making fishing nets where paper yarns are twisted and knotted together to make netted kind of undergarments to create distance between the body and the cloth. And this technique was also used to hide secret messages, as the yarns could be made from letters. It was also made from sliced up sheets of paper, and most commonly were upcycled from other materials. So this image here on the right, you can see that there's a book kind of resting on top of it. That's an old ledger book, so accounting book, that were really popular to be used to make these because the paper is so strong. So this one was made of an old daifukujo, which is the name for the ledger book. And if you see this sort of bundle of yarn here, this spun little bundle of yarn, you can make out, the cream color of the pages, the red color of the stamps, and also the black ink as well. So I just wanted to show you as well this close-up of the texture of the 3 different paper cloths to give you a better idea of what I was talking about. Japanese paper is of such high quality that it was reused and repurposed into other products. This kimono, which may have been made as an undergarment, was made of ledger books in the same way and would have been absorbent, soft, and warm. So paper really lends itself well to circularity and upcycling, as it can even be repulped and turned back into pulp given the right conditions. But despite its circular nature, paper clothing can also represent a vision of a disposable future for manufacturing and fashion. In 1966, to sell more disposable paper products, American paper company Scott Paper ran a campaign in which they offered 2 disposable paper dresses printed to match the napkins and place settings to any customer who sent in a redeemable coupon and $1. This ignited a 2-year fad in North America and Western Europe that represented an optimistic vision of the future, one in which we humans can have whatever we want at a very low price and simply throw it away once it's exhausted its physical or social potential. On the left is the original advertisement from Scott Paper, and on the right is this is just one of my favorites because it's from Johnson's Pies, because of course, when you're shopping for pies, you shop for dresses too. So despite this relatively new kind of space age phenomenon, paper was not originally designed to be disposable, and its earliest forms, rag paper, were durable, circular, and regenerative. So now let's get into some of the details about rag paper. What is a rag? The term rag harkens to a period of time when paper was actually made using cotton rags, which were cleaned and then broken down into fibers, which were then used to manufacture paper. So in a sense, it could be stated that the fine paper business has always been engaged in recycling materials for production since its very beginning. Today, paper is no longer made from rags, and the term rag is less common. You'll often see paper called, cotton fiber content will be written on it. And if you buy a sheet of rag paper now from a paper shop, it's likely just made with cotton fibers rather than actual recycled rags. This image on the left is some denim pulp that I made, and these are sort of the pieces of denim before I made them into pulp. The rag paper making industry was reliant on repurposing used clothing and other textile material. It was often collected or scavenged by a rag and bone man, since they would collect rags and bones, which were used in the sort of agricultural industry. Since the raw materials were often scavenged or free in the form of discarded bed linens, fishing nets, or clothing, rag paper was cheap and readily available. And the process for making rag paper was quite simple. Rags were collected, then they were sorted, and the buttons were taken off and all that. Then they were made wet, and then they were sort of balled up and then left to rot, somewhere stinky, in order to kind of start to loosen up the fibers. So that fermentation process started to kind of loosen them up a bit. And then the rags are stamped and then beaten into a pulp. The process doesn't involve any cutting at all at this stage, so the fibers remain supple and long and produce beautiful papers. So the benefit of using waste fabric to make rag paper is also that the difficult task of getting the fibers out of the plant is already done. So all you need to do is loosen the fibers out of the cloth, really. So in fact, recycling was at the core of the paper-making industries in Europe until German engineering invited pulp paper production to take hold in the 19th century, and now rag pulp made from discarded clothes has almost wholly been replaced by wood pulp. So what is rag pulp? Rag pulp is paper-making pulp made from textile waste, cotton, hemp, or flax. And the image on the left is a lump of denim pulp I made from some old jeans, and on the right is a very large Hollander-style beating rag pulp. So continuing on with my definitions, and this is the last one, the next is rag paper. So today, rag paper is mostly made from vegetable fibers consisting of cellulose, such as cotton, linen, hemp, and ramie. Rags are the most precious raw material for the paper maker. Rag papers and rag-containing papers with admixtures of chemical pulp are used for banknotes, deeds, documents, books of account, maps, and copperplate engravings, and as elegant writing papers. They're also used for special technical applications and are much loved by artists for their ability to take color and hold ink, etc. So rag paper, and these are some of my early experiments that are really not very good, but the one on the far right is all denim. The one in the middle is denim and fashion magazines, and the one on the left is linen and denim mixed together. So they're not very good, but they're early experiments, and it's important to experiment. The one thing to note though is that rag paper and all paper can only be made with cellulose fibers, and a sheet of paper is not held together by magic. The bonding and cohesion of surfaces of cellulose within this fiber sheet isn't due to any kind of glue or mucilage or anything added to it. What actually happens is an electrochemical process in which hydrogen bonds form between the fibers. So the fibers are drawn together and aligned by the presence of liquid water during the sheet forming process. Remember the video I showed you with the paper maker pulling the fibers out of the vat with the frame? So they're drawing the fibers together from the liquid water using a screen. Then as the liquid gets pressed out, it produces a tension that starts to draw the fibers together. And these small hairy abrasions called fibrils that form during the beating process, they increase the surface area and increase the friction, which tangles the sheet together. This is unique to cellulose and can't be done with other fibers. So if somebody tries to tell you that Tyvek is a paper, tell them I said it's not. So as I mentioned earlier, I've been working on a beater to start producing some rag pulps and rag papers, and my video is gone again. I wonder if it will show up if I go like this. There's the video. Let me see if I can play it. Maybe not. So I've been working on a beater to start producing some rag pulps and rag papers, and the beater I use is a Hollander style Reina beater. and can do about 500 grams of pulp in about 3 to 4 hours, depending on the thickness of the original cloth. And in this little image series and this video, here we go. You can see somebody adding pulp, cut pieces of cloth into the beater to make the pulp. And then on the right is sort of what it looks like after it becomes pulp. And then we've sort of turned it into a sheet of paper. Yeah, so you can see in these images that the original form of the pieces is gone and the fibers have become a pulp. So my experiments are still very rudimentary and in their early phases. So I'm just going to end this presentation now by introducing you to the works of some other practitioners who are far beyond my rag pulp making and rag paper making capabilities. These are the Uraba Paper Company. So they're taking a bit of a hiatus now, but the Uraba Paper Company is Australia's premier Indigenous paper mill and is the first Indigenous business to make top quality handmade paper at a production level. It's an initiative of the Gomeroi women begun in 1998 in the communities of Toomilla and Bogabilla on the Queensland and New South Wales border. So that's up north. Uraba's enterprise involves handmade, locally and traditionally sourced fibers made into sheets of paper and paper products. And the paper is made from 100% cotton rag left over from local clothing manufacturers. You can see here, this is a photo of two members cutting cotton rags for the beater to be made into pulp and to be used to make artwork. And you can see that the rags first need to be broken down before they can be beaten. And they produce these beautiful rag pulp paintings using different colors of rag pulp and laying them down on a flat surface. This artwork is called Survival by Leonie Bing. Bing. And the next is a screen print on handmade cotton rag paper by Auntie May Hinch, who's one of the founding members of the Uraba Paper Company. And finally, I'd like to show you the work of Sydney-based artist Melissa J. Harvey, who makes paintings using a pulp sprayer to spray her rag pulp onto a flat surface. And for those of you who are surprised right now, as I was, this is actually a common technique. Inspired by rough materials and reflections of light, these large-scale pulp paper works are made from recycled cotton clothing and domestic cloth. The artist has her own beater and produces all of her own rag pulp from reclaimed fabrics, clothing, bed sheets, etc. And these are some works from her Unraveled series. And I think to end my presentation, I'll read her artist statement about this work. This is a body of work based on my nan's tablecloth, an heirloom passed on to me, never used, crisp linen, vibrant in color, left folded in the cupboard for generations. I'm left wondering what this item's story is. The Unraveled series is made from recycled cotton pulp, sourced from donated clothing and domestic cloth from my local community. And I think that's a nice place to end the talk. Thank you for listening.